I'm back with David Weber again today. We're outside his house. We're going to talk with him about his Dahak series.
Mm-hmm. The way that the books came to be. I was sitting on my front step one summer evening, and I'm looking up, and here's this huge, like, orange moon right on the horizon. And I said, wouldn't it be cool if we didn't have a moon at all? We had a giant alien starship up there. Oh, wow. You know, I had what my people who have the misfortune to know me well refer to as one of my ooh shiny moments.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so then, of course, I had to figure out why we could have a giant starship up there. And why anyone needed one that big. Okay, I mean, the Death Star is supposed to be, what, like 500 kilometers or something in diameter? Okay, Dahak is 3,000 kilometers in diameter. You could put the Death Star inside Dahak about 4 times. Okay, maybe 5. There actually, an artist did a cartoon for me, which unfortunately got wiped out by water damage. And you see Dahak going through space like this. You got the zigzag line to show where he's been. And there's a balloon, and the balloon is saying, "Here, Death Star! Here, Death Star!" Okay. But anyway, so I am not a big believer in the conspiracy theory of history. Okay, I think the conspiracy theory of history is for one of 2 kinds of people. People who are too lazy to figure out what really happened, or who should be writing novels because they really like inventing things to tell the story they want to hear. But anyway, I had to write what may be the greatest conspiracy theory novel in the history of science fiction to explain why we had a giant starship that had been in orbit for 50,000 years. Basically, it starts, I think, early in the 21st century. I'd have to go back and look. I wrote it in the 1980s.
Okay.
So if I'd said it in like 2037 or whatever, it still would have been 50, 60 years in the future. I don't remember the exact time frame on it. We're close enough to it by now that we're obviously in an alternate timeline from it.
Right, okay.
The protagonist, it's hard for me to decide who the protagonist in the books really is. Partly because it changes depending on which book we're at, and partly because there are so many strong characters in it in terms of the part they play in the story. Okay. But Colin McIntyre is a Navy commander. He's been picked for the first interstellar mission, which is going to be a joint U.S.-Soviet mission.
Okay.
Told you it was written in the 80s.
Yeah.
And he is testing one of the systems that's going to go aboard the survey craft. Okay. And it's a gravitic surveying device that uses gravitic pulses to map. It's like deep radar imaging, but using gravity instead of radar and going deeper. Okay. And everything is going fine until he gets... And they need to find some place where there's not going to be any interference from other signals and whatnot. And the only place they can find at this point is the other side of the moon, where he's in the shadow of the moon. There's no other signals coming in. So he gets around there and he flips on his equipment and discovers that there's an obvious malfunction because whatever else the moon may be, it's not hollow. Okay, and he's getting like these thousands of kilometers of tunnels and everything showing up. And so he's like, great, we're only 2 years from launch. This is a U.S. part of the mission, and it is so screwed, And that's when he realizes that he's not alone, that there's this thing that's about the size of a Saturn V booster, which has matched orbit with him. And no reaction thrusters, no nothing, And he's like, oh shit. his survey ship is armed. This is an all-up dress rehearsal. And so he orders whatever this thing is to stay away over the radio, or he'll fire on it. When it doesn't, he fires a couple of missiles, which just disappear. Okay, they don't hit anything. They just, poof, they're not there anymore.
Off the radar.
Yeah, and so he's like, great. So then this thing sticks him with, it can only be a tractor beam. Okay, and starts taking him and the entire survey vessel, despite all the reaction power he's got. Just, yeah, okay, fine, whatever you've done. And then they're flying straight towards the surface of the moon at still traveling at like maybe 1,000 kilometers per hour. And he's like, oh shit. And that's when the bottom of the crater opens and they go into this huge tunnel. And he goes through like literally hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, big enough for this Saturn V, 2 or 3 of them to pass abreast. I mean, he's going like, well, I guess maybe the survey device works, kind of thing. And he winds up being gently deposited on a hangar deck, which is like, he can't see the other side of it. All this inside the moon.
Okay.
And a voice requests that he leave his ship. It comes over the radio. Requests that he leave his ship and come to the command deck. And he's like, I don't think so, more or less. But then he reflects on it. He says, okay, what am I going to do? Okay, I mean, I got enough air and stuff on board here. I can stay aboard for maybe a week, 2 weeks. Then what? So he says, okay. So he comes out. And the air is good. Okay, the voice promises him that the air is good. So he gets onto the ground vehicle that's waiting for him, and it zips him into more tunnels, and they're going so fast everything's just a blur, and they go, 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 and then they turn and start decelerating, kind of thing. And he's like, oh my God, and it stops another passageway, and he's walking along the passageway. He comes to the doors to the command deck, and they're like these bank vault things. They're like 6 inches, each of them thick, and there's like 12 of them, on each side. And he goes through them. And he's on this command deck that is like right on 500 meters across.
Okay.
And so the voice invites him to have a seat. And so he goes and he sits in one of these control couches. And the voice says, I have to explain. I'm sorry, about all this. But, so Dahak, so he says, well, why don't you explain to me in person? And he says, I am explaining to you in person. And he says, that's not what I meant. And he says, all right, fine. Start with explaining how somebody built a base this size on our moon with nobody noticing. And the voice says, I'm afraid you're laboring under a misapprehension. This is not a base on the moon. This is your moon. And the reason I can't come and talk to you is that I am the central computer and I don't got a body. So Colin is like, okay. And according to Dahak, he's been stuck in orbit around Earth for 52,000 years after a mutiny on board.